Welcome to Think Deeply, Speak Simply, brought to you by Prezent, a show about the art and science of communicating ideas and how business professionals can unlock their careers and achieve their full potential with great communication. And now, here are your hosts, Jay Rook and Antoine Valentone.
And Mandy, welcome to the show. We're really excited to have you today.
Thanks for having me, Jay. I've been looking forward to it.
We're going to have a good conversation. Mandy, you're the Senior Director of Corporate Communications at BMC Software, and you've been a marketing and communications leader for over 20 years. Tell us about your role and how you personally define outstanding corporate communication.
Yes. Well, thank you for pointing out the years of experience. I think I have been doing the communication and marketing thing for a little bit now. My role at BMC is, pretty exciting. It gives me a chance to touch lots of different parts of the business. And currently, I lead all of our external facing corporate communication. So that includes media relations, analyst relations, global social media, any of our executive thought leadership or sort of ELT, sort of executive communications as well. But I think, the second part of your question about how I would define good corporate communications, I really think it's just as simple as just good communication in general, which for me is really, sort of three things. It's simple, which reminds me of the title of your podcast, actually. You can use whatever word you want, simple, clear, but it just makes sense, right? Is the first thing. It's engaging. So it actually spurs people to some sort of action. And it's purposeful. So it's intentionally built for a particular audience, and it actually fits a need beyond just your own companies. And I think if you can tackle those three things, whether it's corporate communication or any other type of communication, I think you've got a good chance of having it land well.
Love those 3 points. Thank you. Once we're clear on the message and desired end outcomes, can you walk us through your ideation and work process when you craft corporate communications?
Sure. I think it's, the crafting part, I think, is always a little bit of an art, because I think any good marketer or communicator will tell you no one project is exactly like the other. So I do think, from a first step, I think it's always taking the time to really do your homework. You have to really think about who you're trying to communicate to, who's the audience. I think you can't skip that step. You can't get lazy. Occasionally we do, when it's things that we've done many times over and you sort of know the drill. But I think it's one of those things that sometimes we rush through, and it doesn't help us be as effective as we potentially can. So I think you got to make sure and really think about who you're trying to talk to. Marketing people like to use language like personas and, all that kind of fancy jargon. But I think it's really just about being clear, the people behind who you're trying to speak to, so that you can really think about your approach and your tone of what you're trying to communicate. I think once you kind of get there, it's, then it's really about kind of the desired outcomes, right? Because then I think you're starting to move into tactics, which I always sort of feel like is the easy part. I feel like if your planning is done well, and you know who you're trying to talk to and what you're actually trying to achieve, then it becomes relatively simple to look at all your options on the table. Do I want to do a presentation? Am I doing a written communication? Is it a podcast? What is it that's going to best sort of tackle the people I'm trying to target? And then you sort of kick into execution mode for any of those particular objectives. So, on a specific project, and if I think about sort of storytelling and presentations in particular, which is, we've worked with, companies like Prezent AI, a bit. I'm a huge proponent of storyboarding. I think you can't, I like to start with a blank sheet of paper, because I feel like too often we try to force fit content we've used before. Don't know if you've ever done that before, but I feel like, it's good to recycle and reuse where you can, but I feel like so often people just try to plug in PowerPoint slides or, even blocks of content that you've used in something else, and we try to force fit it into a new opportunity versus really taking a pause to really think about what you're trying to say. So I get the idea of wanting to redo content where you can, and with last minute stuff. Sometimes you've got to take that approach, but I'm a big fan of storyboarding to really make sure that when I'm crafting something, I'm doing it well.
Great answer. Mandy, how does the emotional impact that you want to make on your audience influence the content and structure of your communications?
I mean, the emotional piece is pretty big because, ultimately, I think you're hoping the people that you communicate to are going to do something with that information, whether it's go seek out your company to learn more information, or whether you're looking to inform them or persuade or whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish. You have to sort of appeal to sort of people at the heart of who they are, right? No one's going to be motivated to act when they're super bored with your content or confused by your messaging. Yeah. So I think neither one of those is super effective. And especially with all of the noise these days and all the different ways that we're sort of getting messages from so many different places, if you don't want your content to get lost, you've got to find a way to appeal to the person behind the content. I think sometimes we forget that our customers, partners, buyers, like whatever language you want to use, that those are all real people, with like hopes and dreams and families and, all those things, sort of pets and, behind the scenes. And I think we forget to just sort of talk to real people. And I think if your communication reflects that, typically that's going to make some sort of an emotional connection. And I think you're going to have a much better chance of them doing something with what it is you put out.
And Mandy, just out of curiosity, you mentioned all the different ways in which we can communicate with others. Yeah. Now, have you found one to be more effective or one that you personally prefer versus others in order to sort of get that emotional response that you mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a pretty visual person myself, and I do think visuals, when done well, like visuals, music, all those different things that really sort of touch on all the senses, I think, tend to be the tools that you can kind of grab from your toolbox to, sort of help you achieve your goals. But at the same time, it does really depend on what you're trying to do, like this podcast, right? That goes after a certain, sort of audience that kind of really enjoys, learning and listening as a way to sort of retain information. Some people would rather watch video and, that's something that they prefer. Some people would rather just read it. Can you send me the transcript, please? I don't want to take the 20 minutes, they would rather do it in 3 minutes, so I do think it depends, which is probably what's always the interesting part of being like a communicator or marketer. Again, there's no like one size fits all. And because we're dealing with people and people are messy and different, and we all have our individual points of views, it's not apples to apples. What I like to do might not be the way Jay likes to get his information, So, I mean, I do tend to think, again, where you can bring in as many of our additional senses as possible, I think you improve your opportunity. If you're at an event, can you bring in music? If you're, doing visuals, can you make sure it includes like people, not just animated icons, right? Like, is there photography that you can bring in? I think when you can take advantage of those things, it just makes things more interesting. But I also realize that's a preference too.
Sure. Thank you. In fast-paced, deadline-driven environments, we don't always have the amount of time we'd prefer to create a quality work product. What is your advice for executing campaigns when timelines are tight?
That's tricky, right? Because that's pretty regular.
Yeah, exactly.
for most of us. I mean, in general, I'm a big proponent of ruthless kind of prioritization and recognition that maybe we're doing too much. Because I do think when you're in those situations, often it's a bigger conversation that you have to make sure and sort of have, so that you can make sure you're not sort of spread in too many different areas instead of applying a little bit more focus in fewer areas. But that's a bit of a bigger conversation. I do think there's sort of the day-to-day need, and I think we've all had those moments where we are just given a project that needs to be done quickly, and it is what it is. We don't have a lot of, optionality in terms of how that goes. So, I mean, I think my biggest advice there is to ask for what you need to be successful, and don't work in a silo. I think that so often when people get handed a project, they feel like, okay, I need to just go off and just kind of get this done. And sometimes, or I know I've done this in the past, especially earlier in my career, I would wait a little too long to sort of ask really good questions or bring in additional people, because I think I didn't want it to look like I didn't know what I was doing or I needed help. And maybe that was being a little bit vulnerable. And I think in situations like that, when everyone's kind of on a tight deadline, you've got to work together, you got to collaborate. Don't skimp on taking that pause to really know what you're trying to do before you just jump to the tactic, because I think time and time again, it backfires. You kind of rush through the deliverable and then it still doesn't hit the mark, right? So I think understanding the resources and things that are available to you is really important, but I really believe in not being afraid to reach out as well.
Thank you. I appreciate the share from your personal experience. What can we learn from your experience in analyst relations that we can apply more broadly in workplace communications?
Sure. Yeah. Analyst relations is pretty exciting. It's really the influencing the influencers, we often call it. And I think a good communication strategy really takes the analyst community seriously, at least from our side of the business, especially being in, like enterprise software. We know that a lot of our customers really rely on all the big analyst firms to, get both research, counsel, sort of understand what their options are for different things that they're trying to do. So if analysts are not familiar with what you are doing, you are not going to be top of mind and you are not going to be recommended to your customers. So it's really important to engage that community. But I think probably my favorite part of the analyst community, honestly, is just the ability to listen and learn from them. So yes, it is about making sure they are briefed and current on what your business is doing so they can hopefully share that with customers that come their way. But I also think, they're so deep in particular industries and they're talking to customers on a daily basis. They're talking to your competitors on a daily basis. They're pretty informed in different spaces. And so being able to sort of think about it from a continuous learning perspective and really take it as an opportunity to listen and learn, it can really be a great tool to kind of inform your communication strategy in the direction you should go.
Thank you for that. What does it mean to you to be adaptable in our communications?
I think when I hear adaptable, I always think of, the Friends episode where they have the couch and their pivot, that episode.
Yes.
I always think of pivot, right? Because I feel like I feel like that's what we've all lived and breathed over the last few years. Quite honestly, I think, working through COVID and just every business has had something that they've been trying to deal with, from a transformation perspective. And I think we've all had to get real comfortable with being adaptable, whether we liked it or not. I do really see that as sort of the ability to embrace change or at least, I realize that not everyone likes it. So you can't pretend everyone loves change because that's just not true. But the ability to have it like disruption not totally throw you off, I think is how I view, sort of that topic. I think that whether it's macro conditions, world events, pandemics, all those sorts of issues, or whether it's something more internal, like you've just had a big leadership change within your company or a big reorg or an acquisition or who knows, all of those things are going to require you to be agile as a company and to sort of adjust what you need to do. Honestly, as communicators, it's your job, right? Like we're a big part of helping drive and communicate changes, whether it's to our employees or to people outside of our company. So I do think if you're a marketer or a communicator and you're not comfortable with being adaptable, that's going to be a challenge.
Thank you. You also have experience in creating C-suite executive communications. Can you share some of the best practices when it comes to executive presentations?
Sure. I think, C-suite communications can be really fun. You're I think the part that I enjoyed about it over the years is that you really are working closely with individuals. And it always comes back to people, right? So it's the ability to really, partner with somebody and understand their point of view and help them, sort of extract what's in their brain and articulate that out to the outside world in, various communication forms. From a best practice standpoint, I would say, I think you have to be a good listener. You have to be able to ask good questions, because so often you're a little bit of a translator in regards to, what, I don't know, like whatever you're passionate about. And, if I'm your communication partner and I have to help you go, present at events or, speak in different venues, it's that ability to sort of know you well enough and know what our business is trying to do well enough that we can kind of merge that, into a story. I think you have to, know, is your executive, are they visually driven? Are they data driven? Do they like photography? Do they like icons? Like some of it gets down into those sorts of real little, details. Do they like heavy data and they want like charts all over the place? Or do they like inspiring quotes and, different visuals? Everyone has a totally different style and different triggers, for what's going to help them really excel in the communication environment. So your job is you get to play a little bit of a detective, I think, and kind of figure that out. I think you have to find that interesting. Otherwise, it's, you're going to feel like you're just a handler, which is, I think, not an accurate representation of the role.
For sure. And I love that thought about pairing the messaging style and content with the presenter. That makes total sense.
Yeah.
Mandy, what about today's theme would you like to talk about that we haven't covered already?
I feel like we've covered a lot. I think, corporate communications is interesting because it really does, you're really speaking on behalf of like your entire company brand. And so, versus sort of speaking on or focusing on a particular like product line or particular feature or even a particular person, it's really your opportunity to speak to the outside world about what your company represents. I think we tend to overcomplicate things a little bit with our enthusiasm to just share every little amazing detail about what we do as a business. So I think it's, it's an opportunity to kind of put yourself in your customer's shoes. And again, try to, keep it simple, keep it purposeful, be able to really help the world understand why you exist, really.
This is a question we ask of all of our guests on the show. Do you think great business communication is more of an art or science, and why?
It's a blend, right? You must get that answer most of the time.
We've heard it before, but what's your angle on it?
I think the nuances in good communication can be pretty simple, or subtle, really. Yep. I think, like if I think about, BMC, so we're an enterprise software company, and we have sort of this great vision about helping companies become autonomous digital enterprises, right? So, when we're trying to figure out how to really communicate that, we're trying to make sure and keep our customers at the center of everything we do. Help them articulate how embracing technology for things like automation, data analytics, et cetera, can really help kind of drive and influence company direction. And so you have to think about, how exactly you want to do that. You don't want to, I think bringing in data and being able to share metrics and numbers is really powerful, but I think you have to remember that it is about the overall story. Typically I think whenever we can share a use case or really put a spotlight on a customer and really help bring some of those stories to life, it just makes a lot more sense. And I think as people, we really respond to stories. And so when I think about the whole art and science connection, it's, yes, being able to kind of back up what you do with sort of like numbers and metrics. And yes, you're going to save this much money. And yes, you can go off and accomplish these things. But I also think you have to remember and speak to kind of the heart of your customers and share the storytelling piece as well.
Love that answer. What advice would you have for aspiring business leaders who want to improve their communication?
I mean, so much of what we've already been talking about, honestly. And I think it feels like kind of the approach of your entire podcast, series as well, which is really about keeping it simple. I think you got to get back to basics. I think too many people, all the way up to CEOs, at moments, and part of it is because we're busy, don't take a minute to really think about, again, who am I trying to talk to and what am I trying to do? Making sure you do that sort of with every single thing you go out and do. I think you have to stay curious. You have to listen and, continue to sort of seek out information from others. And then I would also say, be yourself. I think we feel like we have to put on a certain, sort of, persona or face when we're out there sort of talking to the world, or we have to sound professional. And that's what, we think that looks like. And, I think we forget that a lot of times people just want to talk to other real people. And so I think when you can be yourself, it's always better. And as communicators, I think so often we speak for others so often that sometimes we start to lose our own voice as well. So I think helping marketers and communicators realize their voice matters too, is important.
And when you're initially talking about keeping it simple and concise, it reminds me of the Abraham Lincoln quotation around, "I'm sorry I wrote you such a long letter, but I didn't have time to make it shorter."
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Man, I'm sure our guests would love to connect with you and follow your content. Where's the best place online for them to follow you?
Sure. You can find me on LinkedIn under my name. And then I'm on Twitter also at Mandy Knotts. So pretty easy to get a hold of me.
Lovely. Antoine, any final questions on your end?
No, no other questions. I really appreciate you taking the time, Mandy, to join us today and share, the knowledge you have with everyone. And I'm sure everybody's really going to enjoy it.
Oh, thank you. It's been a pleasure. I appreciate you having me.
Excellent. Mandy, on behalf of myself and all of our listeners, thank you so much for today.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Think Deeply, Speak Simply. To learn more about the art and science of communicating ideas, visit our free resources at Prezent.com. That's Prezent.com.